Ever wonder if you're getting the whole story about healthcare news? Ever ponder why people are getting sicker while drug companies are making billions? Do you wish you could trust the food and water you're putting into your body and the air and the land you depend upon? You've come to the right place. The United States Health Consortium TV show is a web-based worldwide broadcast that brings you real people with real news that matters. We are a team of reporters, scientists, doctors, and families. We aim to educate and advocate for clean air, water, food, medicine, health, and clean living. Come along on our journey to create a better world.
Hi, my name is Eileen. On behalf of the United States Health Consortium, I want to welcome you and thank you for tuning in. Our USHC Show TV series will help you learn more about the issues and offer choices for you and your family. We hope you all become involved. Our first USHC show is a series, Who's Calling the Shots? We're excited to present our entire series filled with experts, interviews, and panel discussions. And towards the end of each hour, we have important action alerts for you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Wendy Silvers, founder, Million Mamas Movement, and a grateful member of the United States Health Consortium. Today, we are gathered with a multidisciplinary panel to discuss House Resolution 327 with regard to the 30-plus elected officials who have chosen to co-sign this particular resolution, and to offer information, education, dialogue, and hopefully some inspiration to those that are watching this so that we might change the conversation and have a new conversation on the table. And with me today are a number of multidisciplinary speakers, teachers, scientists, doctors, lawyers. We have Dr. Ted Fogarty, who is chair of radiology at University of North Dakota School of Medicine. We have, he's also the president of the International Hyperbaric Medical Foundation. We have Amanda Vollmer, who is a naturopath, Dr. Yummy. We have also attorney Alan Phillips for data and charts. We have Corey Muniz, who has been involved in health and healing for many years. She's a factivist, not an activist, and her family has been vaccine injured in some fashion. We have Travis Middleton, and he's very involved in lawyerless litigation, very, very informed about RICO, and has been involved in the Hobbs Act. And so we're going to have a real deep dive into what House Resolution 327 means to your family. So there was a press release that was sent out by by Adam Schiff, who is the head writer of this, and then invited other elected officials. And so I'm going to open this up with tossing the baton to Travis Middleton.
The ethics of the vaccine schedules, babies being vaccinated out of the womb, immunology, and conflicts of health due to this early schedule. That you oppose the schedule because they're so close apart, and it disrupts the child's immunity based upon its closeness and the amount of repetitive vaccines. The point is self-preservation. That is a higher issue of law, a higher issue that even the legislators understand. You're not required to follow a program that gets you killed or injured. With the backdrop of Dr. William Thompson, who's basically blown the whistle on himself about the corruption at the Center for Disease Control and those studies, Congress is fully aware of what he has done. They have refused to call him to investigate his claim. There's a reason why that is, guys. They don't want to. Yet you have a House Resolution 327 that's still proposing that vaccines are safe and save lives, and they want to mandate this program.
Yes, I agree with you. One of the biggest issues that has been presented is the whole idea of public health safety, which becomes a cross purpose for really doing the testing, as we've discovered in the episodes that have been presented with Dr. Jack Lyons-Weiler, where he talked about the lack of testing in general of the vaccines as opposed to the drugs, mainstream drugs, and that there's no testing that's done to ascertain the cumulative effect of the vaccine, the cocktails, vaccine cocktails that are administered to children. So I'm wondering, from a legal, I'm going to jump to Alan Phillips and ask about that whole dialogue and that conversation about public safety as opposed to the real damage that is done with the cocktail of vaccines.
Well, I think we have to recognize that what has gone on in this country with regard to state and federal health agencies is that in a relative way, they've been co-opted by the pharmaceutical industry, perhaps unwittingly have become marketing divisions as it concerns public health for the pharmaceutical industry. And we really need, in order to have integrity in the law and the legal system, we really need to have a clear division between industry and government rather than the so-called partnerships between industry and government that may perhaps even have been initially established to benefit the public. But what has resulted is that we're getting marketing information designed in the case of vaccines to sell vaccines to maximize the profits from the vaccines, and we're being deprived of any information, voluminous information from mainstream medical sources. This is not conspiracy theory. This is real science, real government statistics, real laws that would weigh against the current policy and law that I would assert, based on my 24 years of ongoing research into the vaccine controversy, appears to be primarily driven by marketing agendas. So, for example, we look historically from official government data about the death decline from the childhood and infectious diseases. I don't think anybody questions the reality that 150 years ago that the childhood infectious diseases were horrible killers. Many people survived those diseases, but there were a number of children who succumbed to them. And this is something we should all be very concerned about. However, across the 1900s, there was a steady decline in the death rate from the childhood infectious diseases. And on average, about 90 to 95% of that decline preceded the introduction of vaccines. And there were many diseases we've never had a vaccine for that also declined in the same way at the same time as the childhood infectious diseases for which we do have vaccines and that were developed and brought into widespread use in roughly the second half of the 1900s. Most of them, some first half, but most the second half. So the idea that vaccines are the reason that we have low death rates from the childhood infectious diseases today is just not consistent with the official government data. However, we could say it is consistent with a pharmaceutical marketing agenda, which is designed to maximize profits from selling as many vaccines as we can. The idea that the pharmaceutical industry would engage in some kind of practice, as I am heavily implying here, that would be something less than one from a position of integrity, is also not a conspiracy theory. This is well documented. The federal government's Justice Department website lists, and these are the only ones I found searching the website, there could be more, but I found 55 fines between 2001 and up to the present time, latter part of 2017, 55 pharmaceutical fines. These are fines that were assessed and paid by pharmaceutical companies, combined criminal civil fines that were greater than $100 million. 55 greater than $100 million. Criminal fines in the pharmaceutical industry in the hundreds of millions of dollars are common. And there have been criminal fines as high as $1 billion. Now, you don't get a criminal fine unless you engage in criminal behavior and you knew you were doing it. If you make a mistake and it's an accident, you're still liable for that mistake, but that's a civil fine. So we need to understand that this is an industry that routinely engages in massive criminal behavior, criminal fines in the hundreds of millions and even as high as $1 billion on at least 2 occasions. These are commonplace kinds of things. Now, the pharmaceutical industry, of course, is not happy about paying these kind of massive fines, but it is apparently routine business practice. And the number of fines and the size of the fines overall, it varies from year to year, but overall, in the latter half of this period, from 2001 to the present day, is substantially higher and greater than the first half of the last 17 years. So there's an increase in growth in this problem. So for all the good that the pharmaceutical industry does, and I have relied on pharmaceutical products in the past, and in some instances actually been glad that I did so. So I'm not trying to paint this as an all or nothing black and white kind of picture. I will assume and take for granted that much good comes out of the pharmaceutical industry, but nevertheless, it is an industry that routinely engages in massive criminal behavior. And I would say just right out of the box, while the vaccine controversy is inherently multifaceted and complex, some aspects of it are very simple. No one should ever be required to take a product from an industry that routinely engages in this kind of massive criminal behavior. Now, we have other formal government data that tells us there are serious problems with vaccines. The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, passed in 1986, created 2 programs, among other things, that act did. One called the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program. This is a program that compensates parents for their children or adults who themselves have been injured or killed, the families of people killed by vaccines. And the total payout to date, the payouts started in 1989 and with any significant amount of money, 1990. The total payout is over $3.77 billion to date. And then there's a separate program called the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. This system is a passive system. Doctors and others who administer vaccines are required to report events, medical problems that show up after the administration of vaccines. The doctor or healthcare professional does not have to believe that the vaccine caused it, but if certain conditions show up, report them, not reporting events as federal law requires them to do. Nevertheless, with what is reported over the last about 27 or so years now at this point that the program's been in place, nearly 560,000 adverse events have been reported. Of those, nearly 70,000 are deemed serious. Nearly 12,000 resulted in disabilities, and over 6,000 resulted in deaths from the vaccines. As alarming as all of these figures that I just mentioned are, there's a report with the Department of Health and Human Services, Federal Department of Health and Human Services, that suggests that fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events ever get reported. And there are other sources, including people from the FDA and the CDC, as well as private agencies such as the National Vaccine Information Center and others, that have estimated that of the serious adverse events, no more than 1 to 10% of those actually occurring ever get reported. So last year, fiscal year 2017, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program had a record payout year, $282 million because of people injured and killed by vaccines. But that could potentially represent $2.8 billion or $28 billion if you can use money as a way of measuring this. The point here is there is an enormous scope of vaccine injury and death is, and the fact that we have our own federal government and other agencies all telling us essentially the same thing, that the vast majority of the severe harm caused by vaccines goes unreported, that fact alone should be enough for everybody to think twice about whether or not we should be required to be vaccinated. But as it concerns the House resolution in question here today, clearly the idea that vaccines are safe and effective is severely erroneous. The U.S. Supreme Court in 2011, Bruisewitz v. Wyeth, used the phrase unavoidably unsafe between 25 and 30 times in the court's 50 or 51 page, something like that, written opinion. And that was part of the justification for the court ultimately ruling that what little liability that the pharmaceutical industry had at that point was virtually all taken away by that court case. So this is an industry that gets billions of dollars a year in subsidies from the federal government to research and develop new vaccines. State and federal governments mandate vaccines. They regulate the vaccines. And then if anything goes wrong, they have no liability. And so we have to now go to the federal government, the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, to see if we can get compensation if you or a family member or loved one is injured or killed by a vaccine. And historically, over the history of that program, only about 30% of the petitioners to that program actually see any compensation. So we have a lot of very serious problems that are not being acknowledged. And again, I would say that's primarily because the marketing interests have been allowed to suppress the complete factual story about vaccines.
Thank you, Alan. You really chunked it down and said a lot. There's a lot for us to address, and there's a lot for those that are watching this that may or may not know. There's a lot to investigate in terms of what the public is being told and what's happening behind the scenes. And what I've heard both you and Travis speak to is the in my language is the governmental collusion with the pharmacy marketing interests. And so that needs to be separated and the information needs to be presented to the public.
My name is Robin Stavola.
My name is Tom Stavola.
And I am the mother of 3 children. Tragically, though, my second child, Holly, died at the age of 5 years old from a vaccine injury after her 5-year well checkup.
I am Holly's brother. I was 9 years old when my sister left the house in an ambulance on February 1st. And on February 4th, my parents came home without her.
I passed Holly's law in New Jersey regarding the antibody blood titer test prior to the second MMR vaccine, served on the Advisory Commission on Childhood Vaccines, and have since this tragedy been devoted to educating myself and others with the research regarding the insufficient medical herd immunity, vaccine risks, and the importance of informed consent.
I am a certified science teacher, auditor, and medical researcher. We are here as representatives of vaccine injury, although some of you are probably thinking right now that we are one of those coincidences that occur so often right after vaccination. However, we are one of the millions injured across the country and worldwide by vaccines every year. Vaccine injury actually occurs every day somewhere in the world. The data collected on vaccine injury cannot be utilized as an accurate barometer of the truth. How many pediatricians and doctors do you know who speak of vaccine risks? There are not many, and this is because there are no consequences.
Without hesitation, I followed my pediatrician's advice, and Holly had received the measles, mumps, and rubella, known as the MMR, diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, known as the DTaP, oral polio, and the MAN2 test at Holly's 5-year well checkup. 1 week later, she began the morning with 104-degree fever, ear pain, sore throat, and after seeing her pediatrician, was nonchalantly sent home with an antibiotic. By noontime, she was taking a 2-hour nap, which was unusual, but did not seem so at the time. Later that evening, she had fallen back asleep at 6 p.m., which was unusual again, but didn't seem so at the time. and awoke at 8 p.m., having a grand mal seizure and a temperature of 107 degrees. My poor daughter was fully aware during all her suffering. I don't know at what point she no longer felt pain. I do know that she was not herself after the ambulance ride to the first hospital, because during the ride, I heard her call Mom from the back, but then after that, I never heard her voice again. At this first hospital, she had tears in her eyes, was moaning, shivering, and endured a spinal tap. I watched bewildered doctors and nurses at the first hospital until I mentioned at the arrival of the second hospital that she had vaccinations a week prior. My daughter endured much more at the second hospital, but to no avail, as it was too late to help her. She was declared brain dead on February 4th, 2000, and I was told to take Holly off life support. She was given a diagnosis of acute encephalopathy. The pediatrician immediately submitted a report to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS for short, for side effect reporting. After much research and attorney meetings, I reluctantly accepted the U.S. Court of Federal Claims compensation for death.
My mother was not given vaccine information statements as required by law. She had signed for the vaccines but received no information about the benefits nor the risks of the vaccines. Proof of this was the fact that in January 2000, the VIS for polio vaccine stated that the oral polio vaccine was no longer recommended. If my mother had been fully aware, why would she have allowed the pediatrician to give my sister the oral version versus the inactivated, which is the current version being used till today? The VIS is not even a full disclosure of the risks, and it doesn't list the ingredients at all. It is an altered version of the manufacturer's package insert for each vaccine.
Here we are many years later, and the atmosphere surrounding the vaccine issue has significantly changed, but not for the better. Fully informed consent is still not present in most doctors' offices. The freedom to take an exemption is being threatened or has already been eliminated in some states. The integrity of our governmental institutions are in question, and even the integrity of our pediatricians. Parents are being bullied, scolded, and dismissed from their office. If I was informed when I went into Holly's pediatrician the morning of February 1st, 1 week after the vaccinations, and he had told us that her symptoms could be a vaccine reaction, there is a good chance my daughter would still be alive. I was told this by a pediatrician who specializes in infectious disease.
My sister Holly did not have a fighting chance because of the fact that all involved in Holly's care before her death at both hospitals were unaware of how to diagnose and treat a vaccine injury, let alone attribute the symptoms Holly was experiencing to the vaccinations she had just received the week prior. When medical professionals and parents see a resolution written as such with no mention of vaccine risks, but only mention of benefits, it is grossly negligent and lacking full disclosure of the scientific truth.
So, in light of the growing body of scientific evidence implicating vaccines in a wide range of lifelong negative health outcomes, how will this resolution help doctors both recognize and treat vaccine side effects, many of which are lifelong or fatal, so that tragedies like my daughter's can be stopped?
And how can you defend a medical program which is non-specific to the individual, ignore and deny the vaccine injuries that occur daily, and allow the ramifications of this resolution?
I want to jump over to Corey in this moment, because I was talking with Corey before we started, and Corey, I believe you mentioned something about sanitation, and you also mentioned about almost every, if not every one of your family members are vaccine injured. And so piggybacking on what Travis and Alan have spoken about in terms of what's being presented regarding the vaccines and the lack of clarity and transparency, I would love to hear what you have to say about House Resolution 327 and any other points.
Well, I just think it's utterly ridiculous that anybody at this point in time, 2017, can say that vaccines have been proven safe. Like Travis and Alan have touched on the fact of the VAERS reporting agency. They have paid out over $3 billion to families. The average payout is about $250,000. as I've been told. So it's not like one parent's getting $3 million or anything like that. And these are things that really have to be proven. And I also think it's very important to acknowledge how that 1986 Injury Act got into place. And that was by lobbyists from the vaccine industry actually blackmailing Congress and stating to them, if you do not remove our liability, we will no longer continue to manufacture vaccines. We have all kinds of chemicals and pesticides, herbicides, bacteria, viruses put in these things, and we're injecting them not the way we would normally get them, which is through our eyes and our nose and our mouth, which are filtering systems, but they're injected directly into our bloodstream. And just a common sense to me as a mother says, that's crazy. Why would I do that? So to touch a little bit on my family, I'm married to a wonderful man who put 22 years into the military. And of course, what a lot of people don't realize is they test these vaccines on our military first. Mm-hmm. And way back in the 1800s, in 1902, they had issues. Doctors came out en masse talking about how troops were just dropping dead and how people that were perfectly healthy after these vaccines died. My husband now is on a daily basis in pain. Every bone in his body aches, every joint in his body aches. We went through 2 years of detoxing him from heavy metals and chemicals from his body, so he is a little bit better. I myself have had a vaccine injury. I was in the entertainment industry in my younger days, and we get them on the set for free every year. And I kind of got bullied into doing it one year, which then ended me up with the flu. It was the flu shot. I got the flu. Then I got bronchitis, and that turned into walking pneumonia. And at the time, I went into my doctor and I asked him straight out, do you think this could be from the flu vaccine? And he said, off the record, absolutely. And so I think we have a problem with doctors knowing, but yet still going through with the talk that they're getting from the AMA or the FDA on these things, and the verbiage that keeps going on and on and on that is totally been disproved by the public. I ended up so severely sick, they wanted to put me in the hospital. I had to fight that because I was a single mother at the time, and through natural remedies was able to cure myself. I have a son who's 23 years old. He was declared gifted in first grade. And shortly after that, after getting, I believe it was his DPT shot, came down with severe processing issues, and I had to get an IEP, which is an individual educational program for those who don't know, and had to hire attorneys and had to fight tooth and nail to get him the help he needed to get him through his school years. And this was extremely draining on me emotionally, being a single mother, financially. It was incredibly hard. He has been able, because he is extremely smart, able to utilize that part of his brain to navigate daily, but there are issues and things every day that come up. My father passed away due to a vaccine, the flu shot as well, within 8 hours after being told prior to the shot that he was in perfect health. After 8 hours, ended up with a stroke. When I was with him in the hospital, I spoke to the gentleman in the bed next to him who was there after 10 hours after his flu shot. Ended up with stroke. There are a lot of nurses that know that this is going on, and they're just terrified to speak out. My stepdaughter had the HPV vaccines, and I had been begging her for 2 years to please not do it. And her mother was a registered nurse, and her mother said, no, you've got to do it. She ended up in the ER twice, in ICU. We almost lost her several times, and her immune system has never been the same since then. And it's just terrifying to me to think that they're going to try and mandate that every living, breathing person on this planet, no matter what their history is, no matter what their medical background is going to be forced to be given the shot. My stepdaughter was held down in labor and forced a vaccine while she was saying no. And this is tyranny. It has to stop. And I don't know how we can get through to our legislators. I have spoken to quite a few on my own, and all I can say is you're very lucky if you have not experienced a vaccine injury, and you're also probably not aware. When I think back to my son's ear infections, his runny nose, things that were going on, and I've never believed in vaccines. And I went to my pediatrician and asked him straight out, what am I supposed to do about this? And he said, to be perfectly honest with you, if you didn't live in Los Angeles, I would say don't do it. But we've had an influx of immigrants that come from countries that are bringing diseases that we're not used to having here. And I would suggest you utilize a delayed schedule. So that's what I did. If he showed any kind of cold or allergy, I delayed. If it was 2 to 4 months, I went at 4 months. Sometimes I even stretched it beyond that. And then finally, I woke up and I said, what am I doing to my child? And I think it's so important as parents and caregivers, because it's affecting the elderly as well. And if we don't step in and be their champions, then we're going to be lost. We're being told that by, I think, 2025 or 2030, 80% of the boys will be autistic. How is that economically stable?
Thank you. Yes, I would imagine that almost every single person that's gathered here today is in agreement with you about the questions. And for me, the what I keep thinking about is how do we educate? How do we inform? All of us are involved in education, and all of us are involved in offering necessary health options and legal options. And I would love to go to Dr. Ted Fogarty in a moment and just ask you, Ted, if you can speak to, in your experience with working with people, please speak to your experience with regard to what's been spoken and to this resolution. What can we do? What have you seen? What is happening?
Sure. Well, I'm in a small state, rural state. We only have about 700,000 people in North Dakota, and I grew up in Nebraska. I have a lot of rural medicine ties, and this is a very political situation. Obviously, there's huge implications for our economy, and we have veterans who, again, like Corey had mentioned, have been injured. We have personnel costs in our military. When you look at this at an economic level, where we have spent as a society, $5-6 million training pilots to go fly advanced aircraft, and then we've injured them with the anthrax vaccine. Vaccine Syndrome is a documentary that was produced there in LA by Scott Miller, and I encourage everyone who's watching this panel discussion to watch that documentary. It's a very important part of what we need to look at as a society for how our economy is getting actually harmed by the overuse of vaccines. As a physician, I can speak from the inside of the culture. There's a lot of people who have come around, especially in my community of physicians in North Dakota, including one of our state's top pediatricians, who have said, you're right. There's real problems here. And yet we have a culture that is ingrained with this idea that we can economically save our country lots of money by vaccinating against every disease known to mankind. Some of the issues, you can You can put yourself on a binary ethical black and white kind of situation, or you can look at some of trying to change society gradually when we have an entire economy that is basically 1/6 of our economy is medicine in this country, and this is not going to change anytime quickly. But what I have done in North Dakota, in particular, was in January we had a bill up in the legislature for providing ABA therapy to North Dakota children with autism, and looking at the construct of how do we ethically and economically improve our medical care of our society and citizens by proving that an intervention actually has value biologically. Because the way the paradigm is set up with vaccines now is based on concepts from the 1940s and 50s, where you over-vaccinate all of these individuals as a population rather than actually practicing a Hippocratic approach to medicine. You know, when I'm a physician and I'm going to do a procedure on somebody outside of vaccines, I'm expected to ethically check my results. I'm expected to prove that intervention was helpful for that particular individual. And that doesn't happen anywhere in the vaccine world. And so simple approaches such as, backing off the schedule. We have never had a study that compares simply the same load of vaccines at different times. In my area of medicine, radiology, we look at a harmful toxin, which is radiation. And from a pediatric radiological ethical construct, we avoid at all costs putting a child in a CT scanner on day one of life. And if I, as a physician, were to advocate that we should do 4 head CTs on a baby, because we're not going to spend the money to check whether that first head CT was adequate. We're just going to assume that kid moved a little bit in that first head CT and then moved again on a second one. And we know from population studies that 60% of kids will move a little bit on each head CT. Therefore, we need to do 4 head CTs to make sure that we get an adequate coverage of your brain in that diagnostic parallel. That's the same thing with the timing of the hepatitis B vaccine. We're doing it 4 times. We're doing it on day 1 of life, and we're not even checking to see if the child needs it. And I guess, my point is, I'm in a big apparatus of establishment medicine, and to take on at least the most unethical, in my opinion, the most unethical vaccine in this day and age is hepatitis B on day 1 of life. And this is why, and I'm, again, from a rural state, married a country girl, farm girl. We've got cattle in the family, and a lot of my veterinarian colleagues in the plains that I keep up with, they see where when they vaccinate too early a calf or a dog, it's not even efficacious. It doesn't work. And so now we have in this day and age 4 million American babies born in this country every year who get a $50 hepatitis B shot on day 1 of life. And most of those women were vaccinated with that very vaccine and have already created antibodies to hepatitis B surface antigen, which are then flooding that child's body in utero, transplacental, basically these antibodies are crossing through the placenta, and that child comes out of the womb with the acquired immune system of the mom. On day one of life, it's actually the highest levels of acquired antibodies from the prior generation of humanity, the mother. And so when you're thinking about this from a biological construct and ethical construct, why in the world would we as a nation be paying $200 million a year for hepatitis B shots on day one of life when 99% of these kids have mothers who went to their obstetrician and actually got tested to see if they have hepatitis B itself? And in many of the hepatitis B panels, there's actually an antibody titer check for hepatitis B surface antigen. And so this is kind of a bit of a personal story here for me and my family, but I kind of tripped over this in the midst of my wife with her last pregnancy. She had to go through a whole hepatitis B DNA test because her surface antigen antibodies are so sky high as she walks around on this planet even today that she looks like she's acutely infected with hepatitis B. And it's probably because she had an overzealous immune system reaction to her Hep B shot when she was, starting college. And those antibodies flooded into our children at such a high level that we've had all of our children tested for hepatitis B antibody levels, and they're zero. So my family had 4 shots in 3 kids, and none of the intended antibody response. And when you think about that, how many kids out there, how many people out there going into nursing that are even physicians, and they don't even have the intended antibody coverage and response that our healthcare workers are supposed to have. This actually also came through with one of my radiology, interventional radiology nurses. She has a child who has diabetes type 1 at age 5, and she's hearing me talk about the problems with autoimmune diseases and what we now call the Aegis syndrome or the Schoenfeld syndrome, which is autoimmunity induced by adjuvants. I mean, this is in all the big immunology circles. Dr. Schoenfeld out in Israel has basically written an entire textbook on how adjuvants cause autoimmune diseases. And so she's asking me these questions very smartly and astutely, and she's like, well, wait, so my next kid, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do all these vaccines, but I know I have to do these vaccines. So can we do them better, safer, and improve on what is a coarse and brutish CDC schedule? And I was like, yeah, let's just do titer checks. Let's check after each of your immunizations. We'll construct a schedule. And the leading pediatrician in the state of North Dakota, my best friend in medicine, Dr. Todd Toogood, and I constructed a vaccine titer check schedule for this nurse and her subsequent children. She then, because she was like, wait a second, don't I want to know if I'm still immune to hepatitis B? And she had a 0 titer. And we're working with catheters. There's blood splattering here and there in these procedures. We're doing medicine in the trenches for her individual protection of being at constant daily occupational risk of hepatitis B infection. She felt that was important. And so again, when you look at the ethics here, we should all be able to have biological determinism. It should be our choices. It should not be forced upon us, but B, from a health care workforce safety issue, why are we not checking and proving that we actually are immune to these diseases to go through this entire vaccine program? And there's more coming for adults too. And in any other branch of medicine, any other area of medicine, if a doctor gets paid to do an intervention on you, to see you, to make sure that your condition has been addressed, and then doesn't check to see that it actually worked, doesn't follow up, then they're ethically at some level, they're not being responsible to the ethics of Hippocrates and the intervention to which they're supposed to be advocating for you, that they've protected you. And so how many, on the other side of the coin here, I know we're dealing with a lot of issues here. A lot of people are like, hey, I don't want to ever have vaccination, but also, why aren't we putting these pharmaceutical companies to the test on, hey, you need to really show us efficacy better. You need to really show that our money, our tax dollars, which we're in basically a socialized economy at some level through insurance companies, through public health. Our medical economy is nearly completely socialized. There's very little capital free choice here for people. And why are we spending all this great wealth of our nation on something that we don't even know how well it works, and we don't even know where the Achilles heels are? The last Achilles heel, which is very close to my heart as a person from the plains and who has been very close to veterans issues and traumatic brain injury with the hyperbaric world, is that we have a giant potential Trojan horse of national biological security here in these vaccines. We have vaccines that are increasingly part of a global apparatus that does not have any care or concern for boundaries of nation states. I don't want vaccines from China. I don't want vaccines from the UK, like in 2004, that were contaminated with Shiracea. All the influenza vaccines, 40% of the stock of influenza vaccines in 2004 never came to America because they were contaminated. And even just recently, the VA in Battle Creek, Michigan, there's contamination found in the influenza vaccines. And nobody's holding these vaccine companies accountable to even basic regulatory medical purity things, laws, regulations, whatever. If the USDA and the FDA were doing their jobs, we wouldn't have vaccines with random contaminants out on the marketplace going into our veterans or anyone else for that matter.
Thank you, Ted. That is a real meal to digest, because you've touched on so many aspects. I'm looking at this press release from Congressman Schiff's office, and it just, vaccine saves lives. Vaccines are both safe and effective, and there is no evidence to suggest that vaccines cause life-threatening or disabling diseases. So I hear from you, I hear from Alan, I hear from Travis, I hear from Corey. We're going to go to Dr. Yummy and speak with her. And so vaccines have saved millions of lives worldwide and prevented suffering for millions more. The importance of vaccinating your children cannot be overstated. And yet, each one of you has spoken to the fact that they're not tested. We're living in, there's no antibodies, there's no systems of checks and balances, there's governmental overreach, there's market-driven agendas. We go to vaccines have been proven to be safe, not, and are an important tool in fighting the spread of disease and saving countless lives. Would you all shake your head yes if you agree, shake your head no if you do not? Okay, so that's every single person here. This resolution reaffirms the support for the use of vaccines for children. The resolution sends a message of unequivocal congressional support for vaccines, and as you spoke to so candidly, Ted, the biological warfare without regard for human life or where it's manufactured. Consensus of medical experts in favor of timely vaccination. Where is that part of the discussion? And then the Vaccine Saves Lives resolution rejects unfounded and debunked theories about the dangers of vaccines. Where has there even been an unfunded, safe study that separates government from the medical community, pharmaceutical organizations from government agendas, from policies, recognizes that scientifically sound education, has there been scientifically sound education and outreach campaigns? I'm seeing...
Well, as a medical educator, I can tell you there is nothing in the medical education curriculum of our U.S. medical schools that has anything to do with vaccine safety awareness. Medicine has lost its professionalism. It's become a trade, and we have more and more conglomerate medical corporations who are employing physicians and wrapping this up into a kind of a big box approach. And in medicine, it's one of those things. It's the white wall of medicine. Nobody wants to talk about even radiation safety. If you look at my branch of medicine, radiology, there's very little even education in medical curriculums on how to safely image people with less radiation. And yet we've, as a community of radiologists in the United States, we have time and time again, we're always refining, and it's often because of our pediatrician colleagues, we're always trying to drop that radiation dose, especially in kids. Well, why is it that the rest of pediatrics doesn't want to drop their toxin load?
Interesting question. It's a great question. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I want to go to Dr. Yummy, who is by training a naturopathic doctor. And I would love to hear how can we change the conversation? What can we do to educate parents and caregivers and healthcare workers to look at this from a different lens?
Thank you. Thank you, Wendy, and thank you to Eileen for inviting me. My voice is challenged because once the flu vaccine got pimped out in my area, I got a secondary illness because I'm also vaccine damaged. So I don't have my tonsils, which is part of my functional immune system, to prevent things from going into my lungs. So I'll do my best to speak as clear as I can at this point. I've been doing a lot of talking and with the chest infection from this. But I have a Bachelor of Science in Agricultural Biotechnology, and I've been researching vaccines for about 20 years. I have a child who's completely unvaccinated and was born naturally, has never been to a hospital or a doctor and never needed to because she's intact. She has an immune system that's intact. The vaccine history, so I've done a lot of history research and I do a lot of science research. So that's my focus. I'm a practitioner. I see people I have a store. I see people on every walk of life with these vaccine injuries. And it's difficult to communicate with the profession because even in our own naturopathic profession, we have been corrupted to work the angle that vaccines are effective on any level. And my research and my work, where I've taken it to, is the understanding that vaccines have never been effective. In fact, when you look back in history, what you see time and time again is every time a vaccine was introduced, or an inoculation, which is a different procedure, you would see epidemics of those diseases in the population. So the epidemiological oversight is being missed here, where we see once the vaccine is actually released, we're seeing increases in the diseases. Whereas if the vaccines were effective, we should see the opposite. We should see the reduction of those diseases. And just even, look around at when certain vaccines are released, you can see that people begin to get sick at that point in time. Now, in the understanding of how the body works, how science actually has been corrupted on a very deep level, as I worked as an animal lab technician as well in University of Alberta, I saw firsthand what was going on at the level of the scientists on the animal models and what they were doing. I was quite alarmed at what I was seeing. I was not seeing the independent type of research I would expect in these halls of science. What I was seeing were scientists and doctors wanting to ensure their funding as a primary target for their continuation. So they were more concerned about continuing the science and even postponing a lot of science in the sense where they would repeat their animal model studies with only slight variations so they could continue the funding before closing up the study. I would see a lot of conjecture, assumptions, and just general bad science based on things of history that just got assumed through. And that's not proper science. So we haven't done proper science on our own system of our body. When I was in naturopathic college, which was a 4-year medical school program, we have to learn everything that the MDs have to learn, plus our own systems of medicine as well on top of it. So it's quite an intensive time. We do have cadaver labs. We have to learn all the ologies. We have to go deep here. And we do have a little bit of discussion on vaccines, but even so, that's not really a huge topic of debate because it's a tiptoed around subject. And, I'm a Canadian, so I'm looking into into the window of the United States, what's going on. And I'm afraid for Canadians as well, because they're starting to try this method of forcing us to take these things. And what they do here is they actually lie. The schools will send home a letter and say, you have to be vaccinated or else, but that's not our law. And so there's a lot of law being broken as well, where it's just, again, being assumed that you have to when that's not the case. So we're seeing a lot of assumption in medicine, in science, and a lot of what I call scientism going on, or the dogma of science. And we're also seeing, and I'm writing a book on this right now called Cracking the Cult Code, which is seeing it run like a cult, essentially where you don't question your higher ups, you don't question authority, you do the work that you're told to do. If it doesn't fit, if the hypothesis doesn't fit the end result, then you change your hypothesis so it fits. That's not science to me. Science is pure observation of reality and taking that information and bringing that into documentation and then seeing if that is repeatable again and again. Then there's a whole case of individualized medicine. That's not being looked at. Everybody is like all the same, apparently, taking the same amount of drug or vaccine depending on race or creed. It doesn't matter. So that's ignorance right there as well, as we touched on, that with the African-American boys being omitted from the CDC MMR study that was touched on by Ted there. So, we have a lot of red flags going on. And so my work at this point in the research is I'm bringing in a new discussion that hasn't really been talked about, that needs to be talked about. Because yes, what everybody said here today is absolutely true. And we do not have the safety studies. We have no safety studies on pregnant women or on multiple doses. We're missing huge gaps of information just in and of the theory itself that vaccines somehow are effective. But I'm taking it to the next level. I'm saying, well, vaccines are not effective on any level because that's not how the immune system works. It's not how the body works. And we're forgetting our history. So, turn of the century, 17th, 18th century was a huge amount of modern medical marvels going on. And what was going on was a 30 to 40 year war between those who purported that the germ theory of disease was correct, compared with those who were understanding that the terrain of the body was what made the body sick or in health. And so there were powerful scientists there, like in the House resolution. There's an argument over the germ theory versus terrain theory that I bring in. And I actually did a YouTube video breaking down every one of these House resolutions. So you can go look at that. If you look up Yummy Mummy Emporium and Apothecary on YouTube, you'll find it. I broke down every single one of these and debunked every single one of them. But the biggest part of it was the first one, saying that Louis Pasteur and Edward Jenner were these great medicine men, when they were, it's well documented that they were liars and thieves and frauds. And there's books out there exposing them and exposing the truth of what went on there at that point in time. And that the Günther Einderlein, and that the somative theory and the isopathic theory of how the body actually works was being buried. And so it's important that we really, when we're going to make these bold claims that these two beings are somehow heroes, it's not lining up with actual fact, historical fact. And we have to take the time to do that work to go back there. And so when I talk to my patients, when I talk to other healthcare workers, and I try to help them understand that the body, we're in a time of the dark ages of medicine, really, about the body and about health. I want to help them understand that injecting anything into the body at all will poison it and damage your own terrain, which is the way that you stay healthy. Tinkering with it, removing body parts, all of these kinds of things, it assumes that we were born incorrectly. There's something missing in us, that somehow God made a fundamental mistake in making us, that we do not have the ability to learn from our environment and get what we need, a natural immunity. A synthetic immunity never works. And as far as the antibody theory goes, that's also not going to hold, because antibodies have not only show infection. The true understanding of if there's any memory cell, if there's a B memory cell made, then you're going to have a so-called natural immunity from a B cell. But it won't make antibodies unless there is the agent present in the blood. So if there's an antibody titer being pulled, it means you're infected. It doesn't mean that you're protected. And that's also a big myth that's around. And, the antibody myth goes a little deeper than that, but that's just not how the immune system works at all. We have a whole system of cells, a cell lineage called somatids that the modern medicine is wholeheartedly ignoring. So how are we supposed to even have this debate? We know that vaccines are killing our kids and maiming people. And I'm vaccine injured. I basically, everyone who walks in my door and they've had a vaccine is vaccine injured, as Dr. Andrew Molden proved from his work, which he mysteriously died before he could implement his next layers of telling the truth and stopping the vaccine industry from pushing forward. So we have a lot more to discuss. And so this House resolution going forward in such a blatant and corrupt sort of overt way, as if they know, this arrogance that we see in the medical field has come through into this House resolution. And it's just, I laugh a lot at it when I do my breakdown, because it's so outrageous. To even make the claims. There's no backing of the claims that are being made. I don't see like a bunch of scientific papers and a bunch of information accompanying this information. So I'm backing it up with a ton of science and a ton of historical information showing that it's all false. So so there's a few things just to summarize. There's a health issue that's not being discussed on how the body actually works. There's ignorance in modern medicine regarding this. There's falsified history, which is being pulled through, that needs to be also looked at and addressed. There's myth and conjecture about how the antibody system works, how all of these products that are so-called working on the immune system works, false. So if we have this, what are we even doing here with the vaccines and pushing them through and trying to force people? And we have history showing us that every time a vaccine is put into a population, we get epidemics of that disease. So it's causing the diseases. So you want to talk about public safety, public health, then stop the vaccines. then you'll have better public safety and public health. You'll definitely have less autistic rates and, rates of chronic bloodborne diseases, which is being created here. So, my angle is I'm really down the rabbit hole. So you can find my videos on YouTube, for more information on that. But I'm just coming in from that angle because Sally Alkerdy asked me to break down this House resolution piece by piece, which I've done. And not one of the aspects written in that document are true. 100% false information. And so the politicians need to go, wait a second, we're not scientists, we're not doctors, we're just taking this information biased. We need to now field like what's been done here, which is excellent. Let's talk to some other practitioners who know a little bit of have a different angle. And what do they have to say? Because that's how you actually have a good argument. You have to actually weigh in people from both sides or multiple sides of the issue. You can't just talk to the people who are nodding and smiling and saying, well, that's the way it is. You can't just play to your own people. You actually have to field the entire group and then get the information. And so that's not what I'm seeing in this resolution. This is very extremely biased. I'm definitely not part of the consensus group in there. And there are many, many other also medical doctors who are not part of the consensus of that vaccines are safe and effective. So right there, that's a falsification. So they need to clean that up. It really shouldn't. It shouldn't be admitted as truth because it's precisely the opposite of truth. So I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you very, very much for that, Dr. Yummy. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I want to just briefly share with you that there was a withdrawal proposed for the House Resolution 327, and that will be found on USHC. And for those that are listening that are new to this dialogue or don't really understand, we're going to make sure that you get as much information as possible to be educated and informed regarding your rights, your choices, and what actions that you can take to support not only your children, but yourself and keeping your body healthy, and what actions you can take, what groups you can get involved with. And if you are one of the 30 plus elected officials who co-signed House Resolution 327, we really invite you to listen to each and every person's talk and presentation today. There's much more to come from us, but we really ask you to investigate and to decide whether you are a public servant or a corporate servant. Who are you serving when you agree to be an elected official? We would like you to just take some time and ask your heart that question. Are you a corporate servant or are you a public servant? And can you contribute to the well-being of your constituency, or could you possibly be contributing to the ill health of your constituency? I just want to say thank you, Travis. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Ted. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you to those that are listening, and thank you to those that continue to do the work every day. And for those parents that are taking care of kids who are vaccine injured, just bless you for all that you do, because it is a really high and holy walk to be doing that. And we will continue to bring you information and episodes so that you are educated and informed. And that is really important. So thank you very much for joining us today. We will see you soon.
Hi, this is Stephanie Stock with a USHC Action Alert. Today we're asking you to call the co-sponsoring Congress members for House Resolution 327. This is a resolution claiming that vaccines are completely safe. Please call them today and ask them to remove their names from co-sponsorship and to oppose this bill. Let them know vaccination is not a one-size-fits-all program. Vaccines are documented in the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program as causing permanent disability, including death. Where there is risk, there must also be choice. Anything less is simply unethical. Tell them that voting for manufacturer and corporate profits over public safety and civil rights diminishes their oath of office and will cost them your vote. Then follow up. If they did not vote for liberty, then please find someone who will and go to the polls and vote for that person. Thank you so much for listening.
Literally in the production process of our vaccines, introducing animal retroviruses, animal disease causing, cancer causing, everything causing retroviruses in these vaccines. And of course, that was January of 2011, and my life as I knew it ended in June of 2011. And from there on, when it was really discovered that there were many, many strains of these mouse viruses coming from the cell lines, and that they were literally contaminating every one of our biologicals. So that was the point at which the government decided to cover it up. Part of the manufacturing process, and they're literally known carcinogens and known neurotoxins. For instance, mercury, formaldehyde, polysorbate 80, which is a detergent, which is deliberately put in there to break down the blood-brain barrier. That is, give the access of whatever is in that needle to the brain of that individual or that is given that vaccine. All kinds of amino acids, calf serum, vero monkey kidney cells, fetal human cells. Vero monkey kidney cells actually contain HIV-like viruses. Porcine cells, pig cells, that actually are quoted to contain pig retroviruses. And they say, oh, but they don't hurt anybody. They're not known to do any damage. Avian leukemia, avian leukosis viruses. So avian retrovirus, bird retroviruses in the eggs that they grow in the chicken eggs that they grow flu vaccines in. And all of this is well documented, not only on the CDC website, but the Institutes of Medicine, the FDA. They know they're there. They've known the risks since at least 1995.
Be sure to tune in to tlbtv.com/Who's Calling the Shots to hear the entire series. Join us Wednesdays at 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central, and 11 a.m. Eastern. Episodes also available at ushealthconsortium.org.